Today I'd like to talk about sedimentary and metamorphic rock. To understand sedimentary rock, you need to know what the term sediments mean. Sediments are materials that settle out of water or air. Let's say you have, well, I guess I should put this pen on. We'll go with black. Let's say you have land, little person there, and water. There are sediments in the water, pieces of sand, just floating debris. Eventually what's going to happen to all that floating debris, it's going to sink to the bottom. And that happens constantly in the ocean. You have debris or sediments that are sinking to the bottom. And what happens is it will sink to the bottom, and then it will be, the next time other sediments sink to the bottom, it'll sink on top of it, and you have another layer of sediments and another layer of sediments and another layer of sediments. And eventually you have these layers of sediments that get so compacted on each other that they end up forming rock. Now, it doesn't just happen in the ocean. You can have sedimentary rock sediments in the air. You can have sediments that have been washed away onto the ground, but whenever they hit the ground or whenever they're washed away to the ground, you still have some of the packing element that you would have out in the ocean. But sedimentary rock is kind of known a little bit more for the ocean than it is for the land. Probably forms a lot quicker there. And in riverbeds also is where you can find sedimentary rocks. But one common thing that you do find in sedimentary rocks is fossils. And you can imagine how that would happen. I mean, say you have a fish here that dies, and if it's not eaten, it will sink to the bottom. And eventually sediments will form on top of it, and sediments will form on top of it, and sediments will form on top of it, and the imprint of the fish's bones are going to be packed in that sedimentary rock. Now, you're not going to find fossils in igneous rock, because fossils would have burned up whenever you had magma or lava in the first place. And fossils generally are not supported very well in metamorphic rock. So when you find a fossil, you can pretty much count it's going to be sedimentary rock where you'll find it. Let's talk about a couple of different kinds of sedimentary rock that are noted in our book. One of them is coal. Coal is formed from plants of old swamps centuries ago, and coal is an important natural resource for us. Another prominent rock, sedimentary rock, is limestone. Limestone is often formed underwater, and it's characterized by having shells and skeleton in it. So if you see some limestone, it often has shells and maybe even skeletons in it. Now, one thing significant about limestones is coral reefs. You have coral reefs that are in the ocean sometimes. In fact, in some places you have quite a few coral reefs, kind of like these well, a reef, of course, is kind of a buildup in the ocean, and these reefs are actually made of corals. This is a little animal that kind of stacks upon itself, and whenever it dies, the corals stay stacked on top of each other. So literally, these reefs are skeletons of these corals. Now, what happens over time, these get packed together, and they form something called limestone. So limestone is the base of these coral reefs, and the older these coral reefs get, the more corals are packed on top of it, the more of it happens to be limestone. Now, limestone actually plays a part on land, or I guess under land as well. If you have limestone, however much limestone under the land, and you have underwater flow underneath it, if you have like an underwater stream, it will generally dissolve this limestone, and it'll end up forming a cave. And it's very common around the southeast to have these types of caves. You may have heard of or seen Sequoia Caverns, a big cave at Ruby Falls. We have a lot of caves here in the southeast that form just exactly that way. You have limestone that has just kind of disintegrated away because of underwater water. Now, scientists can learn a lot from these sedimentary rocks. They know a little bit about about the past because of fossils. They also know what layer is the oldest. If you have sedimentary rock down here, this layer right here, of course, will be older than a layer on top of it, just because of the nature of things settling down on top. So the bottom layer is going to be the oldest, the top layer is going to be the newest. Also, you can tell by scientists study sedimentary rocks about when floods happen and even what direction the current flowed. Well, we now talk a little bit about these metamorphic rocks. Metamorphic rock is the third kind. We have igneous rock, sedimentary rock, and now metamorphic rock. Now, metamorphic rocks are formed by heat and pressure, and that process of forming a rock by heat and pressure is metamorphism. Now, you may remember that these three different kinds of rocks kind of interchange. An igneous rock can form a sedimentary rock, can turn into a sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock can turn into a metamorphic rock, and they all are interchangeable. So forming, say, sedimentary or igneous rocks by heat and pressure is called metamorphism, and the resulting rock is going to be a metamorphic rock. Now, in order to have a metamorphic rock, you have to have a parent rock. That's what the rock originally was. And I'll give you an example here with limestone. If you'd have limestone that goes deep underground, and you have a lot of heat and pressure on top of it, I mean the weight of the land, and you may have some kind of volcanic activity nearby, and of course this would be volcanic activity nearby, then you could get heat from here and pressure from here, and that limestone will end up forming a whole different kind of rock. It's marble. Limestone is the parent rock, and marble is the rock that is metamorphosized, I guess you might say, that comes from it. We have a lot of marble here in Georgia. Since intense pressure is on these rocks, it's very common to see the minerals flattened out. And you can see this picture of a metamorphic rock. Look how flat these minerals in black here just kind of flattened out. And that's very common of a metamorphic rock. If you were just pick up a rock and look at it and had these flat streaks in it, it's probably a metamorphic rock. Now, you may not think that this rock very deep in the ground could come to the surface, but you do find a percentage of metamorphic rock at the surface. That kind of brings us to another point, that there's so much heat and pressure that sometimes these minerals actually reform, recrystallize, and the new atoms are restructured, and you actually get different minerals in some metamorphic rocks than they started out with in the original rocks. Now, generally, metamorphism is over large areas. If you have large areas where you have a lot of weight from the land on top, that's a large area of rock that will be metamorphosized. But sometimes there are a couple of different ways, you can have a smaller area of metamorphism. If you have areas around lava, then it can be a smaller area where you can get metamorphic rock. And whenever you have land that pushes together to form mountains, you sometimes have a smaller area of metamorphic rock there. Final two things I want to talk about are foliated and non-foliated. And that's pretty simple. A rock like this, metamorphic rock like this, is going to be foliated because it has these streaks of minerals. A foliated metamorphic rock has streaks of minerals, and which of course means a non-foliated metamorphic rock has no streaks of minerals. Now, it can have like a slight streak of a mineral, but generally it's clear or almost clear. Now, there are a couple of reasons why you would have non-foliated rock. One is if it's just one kind of mineral. Scientists have found that it doesn't seem to streak as much when it's just one mineral, or just in the case of less pressure. Just don't have as much pressure in some cases in some of these metamorphic rocks. And I hope you learned a little bit about sedimentary and metamorphic rock.